So Marley, I take it it's not snowing in Arkansas right now?
That's finally. It's funny. I lived on the West Coast forever
Mm.
and thought I knew winter, and it turns out I know mild winters. This is real winter.
Yeah. Would you come to Maine?
It'll get more real.
Oh my gosh. I don't know if yeah, we'll talk about this, but I just don't have the clothing for cold.
I mean, it's just an excuse to go buy some more clothes. I definitely had to do that when I moved here. So
I wish it was that easy. They don't
yeah,
often make it in my size,
that
honestly,
is, that is fair.
which we'll talk about. So
Mhm. All right, it is noon. Thank you for coming in to another Wednesday webinar. We are super excited this week to have Marley Blonsky join us. Marley is the executive director of All Bodies on Bike, a biking influencer, an all-around awesome person, and we are super excited to have her. Before we get to start, I want to say thanks to our sponsor for this series this year, Tandem Coffee. If you're in Portland, go get some Tandem Coffee. It's great. Also the best baked goods around, if you ask me. Um, but yeah, without further ado, we're gonna have Marley join us.
awesome. Let me pull up my screen and make sure that everybody can see it. How does that look? Everybody can see it? Great. Okay, I'm just going to pull up the chat window to make sure I can see that as well, because I do encourage folks to use the chat function throughout. If I say something that resonates or you have a question, please feel free to put it into the chat throughout. So hi, I'm very excited to be chatting with everybody today. We are going to be talking about size inclusion in cycling. So kind of my journey into cycling, how All Bodies on Bikes was formed, what All Bodies on Bikes is, and then we'll get into some of the nitty gritty of what is size inclusion, why does it matter, and how you can be more size inclusive in your everyday life. So let's get into it. So as the guy said, I am the co-founder of All Bodies on Bikes. I also get to call myself a professional cyclist, which always feels weird. But I do. I get paid by brands like Cannondale, Shimano, a couple others to ride my bike. And the best thing is they're not paying me for podiums. They're paying me for inclusion, for getting more people on bikes. I'm stoked about bikes, and for just doing work like this. So it's always weird to call myself a professional cyclist, but that's what it is, which is kind of fun. So as we start this conversation, I just like to lay a foundation for where I'm coming from. And this has actually become kind of the motto of All Bodies on Bikes. And that is all bodies are good bodies, all bikes are good bikes, and all rides should be celebrated. This is a picture of me in front of the Asian Art Museum in Seattle. The first time that, or this was really the first summer when I started riding bikes. This was 2014. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. So let's go on a little time travel journey. So it was summer 2014. Obama was president, which seems like light years away at this point, especially as we're, gearing up for this next election. Um, but I was young, you look at me there and no tattoos and just a fresh little baby. But I was kind of undergoing some like really transformative personal stuff. I had just gotten divorced. And I was commuting to and from work. It was like 3 miles each way, so not far, but on the bus. And if you've ever taken public transit anywhere, you know it can be frustrating and long. And so it was taking me almost 45 minutes each way to go 3 miles. And I saw people riding bikes, my friends were riding bikes, and I realized that's what I want to do. They were zooming past me on the bus, and it was just kind of this natural progression in my brain of, well, I don't have a car and I'm taking the bus everywhere. There's got to be a better way. And so I started this journey. And if you're somebody who lives in like a non-traditional body, you know that it's not so easy to just say, I went out and got a bike. So some of the variables I was working with, I was 5'1". I guess I'm still 5'1". That's how bodies work. I was around 250 pounds. And I say that because, as we'll talk about later, bikes have weight limits. And so it was important. I didn't know it at the time, but it was important to get a bike that would work for me. And maybe most crucially, my budget was $400, which even in 2014 dollars didn't get me very far. But it got me this beautiful steel nishiki, which it had steel wheels. If you've ever ridden a bike with steel wheels, you know how terrifying that can be, especially as it gets wet in Seattle, as it tends to do. But that bike really opened up so many doors for me. I learned how to get around town. I learned how to put my bike on the bus to avoid climbing some hills as I was like building up that strength and the endurance and the stamina. And it also kind of was a gateway to bike culture. So I worked at a company that had a pretty strong bike culture, and they did Bike MS every year. Which, if you're not familiar, Bike MS, it's a big charity ride. And I signed up for the 64 mile. And my coworkers were like, Marley, that bike's pretty cool, but you might want something that's a little bit lighter, a little bit more efficient for riding 64 miles. And so I got this bike that you see here, beautiful aluminum. It was like $600, which felt like a lot of money at the time. But as you can see, the wheels don't have a lot of spokes, and it's a very lightweight bicycle. And so within a month of getting that bike, I had 3 flat tires, which part of that's my own fault. I didn't know that I was supposed to be airing up my tires regularly. And so pinch flats just became a way of life for me. I got pretty good at changing my tires. Kind of more, I don't know, impactful. I had 2 broken spokes, which if you've ever had a broken spoke, often means that you can't ride your bike anymore. It knocks your wheel out of true and you got to take it into the bike shop. I also broke my seat post, which all of those things together should have been a clear indication that this bike was not made for me. But all these bike shops just kept sending me back out the door, fix the spoke, send her back out the door. I also started going on group rides because, you get into a hobby and at least for me, I get all in. So I started going to group rides and learned what it meant to be dropped, learned what it meant to be left behind, and I hated it. This whole time, I was also still commuting daily to and from work. So I was still riding my bike quite a bit. And it's funny now that I look back almost 10 years later, if I would have had those experiences now of that many flat tires and that many mechanical issues, I don't know that I would have kept going. But I did keep going. Part of it was just like I had started to find community, but bigger than that, I had started to find joy and freedom on a bicycle. And I just had this determination that I know that there's a better way to do this. This is a picture of me at the end of my first or my longest ride ever at that point at Bike MS. And I was so proud of myself. And so eventually, I got a new bike. I found a bike shop that listened to me and said, okay, Marley, you're taking that little aluminum bike camping, you're loading it up with gear. And quite frankly, you need something stronger. I don't remember if he exactly said you're over the weight limit, but that was the point that he was making is, hey, you're over the weight limit, but there's solutions for this. So I got this great Surly steel bike that I still love. I'm lucky to be sponsored by Cannondale now, but I still point people towards steel bikes if they're looking for something robust and rugged. I learned a bike pack. I traveled all over Canada, the US, and really it was at that point that I started blogging and telling my story. And I was sharing gear lists, and it started getting attention. This was like 2015, 2016, 2017. And people started asking questions, what shorts are you wearing? What jacket are you using? And I started realizing like, oh, I'm just kind of making do with whatever I can find that fits me. I'd go to bike shops and they wouldn't have my size. Or I would look online, and they didn't have my size. And so I was just cobbling things together. And started telling that story. And I realized like, oh, maybe there's something to this. Around that same time, I found Kaylee Kornhauser, who is, if you've seen the film, All Bodies on Bikes, she's my co-star in it, also now my co-founder. And she was on a huge bike ride across Alaska. She had been offered a scholarship and basically a sponsored trip. So they gave her a bike, they gave her clothing, they gave her equipment. But notably, she talked about in this Instagram post that she didn't have a rain jacket. She was riding north of the Arctic Circle and just did not have equipment. And so I slid into her DMs and I said, Kaylee, you don't know me, but I we should work together on this, because I know we're not the only ones, and there's got to be something better. And, you know, as soon as she got back from Alaska, she called me up and we started brainstorming on this. How can we be advocates for other people in bigger bodies? And how do we, it honestly really started all about clothing, because we just wanted clothes to do this sport that we love so much. You know, around that same time, I stopped apologizing, you know, for being the slowest one on the group ride. I started taking up space and I started researching. You know, this fire was lit under me after seeing Kaylee's posts and after all of my experiences of not having equipment. I knew that I couldn't be the only one experiencing this, and being a bigger person in a bigger body, looking for the gear, equipment, and community. And so that's really where the advocacy started. You know, we learned that 70% of the US lives in a larger body. We'll talk about that here in a little bit about what that means. But essentially, you know, from the CDC, and I hesitate to use the terms obese and overweight, and I'll talk about that in here in a couple of slides, but around 70% of the US falls into those categories. But I like to say lives in a larger body. So yeah, my initial hunch was correct. We were not alone in this, and there had to be other people experiencing this. So we started giving workshops. There was a lot of work happening. This was 2017 and 2018 around inclusion in cycling. There was a group called the WTF Bike Explorers, and it stood for Women Trans Femme. And it was lots of folks like myself who were using their bike for adventure and for travel and for advocacy. And they did a retreat, basically, where all these great folks came together to talk about inclusion in cycling and representation. And I realized at that time that nobody was talking about size inclusion. And so next year when the retreat happened, I said, Kaylee, let's give a workshop on this. And so we did. And this is a picture from our first workshop. You know, we're like, we're going to be radical. We're going to wear crop tops. We're going to show our fat bodies. And like 100 people showed up to our talk. And it was then that it was like, this thing has legs. You know, folks were coming up to us who worked in the bike industry and said, yes, how can we work together to solve this? And so, oh, that image didn't show up. Let's see. Well, I'll talk about it. But basically, this was early 2020. If folks have heard of the League of American Bicyclists, they do an annual summit every year in DC. And we said, let's go there and do a size inclusion presentation there. We all know what happened in 2020. The trip didn't happen, but we, instead of presenting to, you know, 30 people who were at this conference, we presented to, I don't know, 500 or something on the internet. And one of those people in the audience was somebody from Shimano, who heard our story and said, let's make a film about this. This is a really compelling story that you're telling. We love the adventures you're going on. We love how unapologetic you are. Let's tell this story. And so film came out in 2021, and that's where All Bodies on Bikes got started from. You know, it was initially just a film, but as I was riding around Seattle in between the time when we filmed it and when it came out, I started thinking, this could be so much more than just our story. This is our opportunity to make this a platform, to make this something bigger. And so we bought the domain, we got the website, we started putting resource guides out, with no intention of making it a nonprofit. You know, I had a very successful full-time career in the corporate world. Kaylee was a PhD student. And this was just kind of a very passionate side project for us, with the end goal of, let's get clothes that work for us. You know, it's funny, if you watch the film, I'm riding in dresses and I do have bibs on underneath, but that was because I didn't have cycling tops that fit me, that I felt comfortable in. Even still, it's a challenge, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the film came out. Since then, All Bodies on Bikes has really grown and taken off. We incorporated as a nonprofit in May of 2023. So still a baby nonprofit, but we're really working to change cycling from the inside out. We do talks like this, we do consulting work with brands, and then maybe more fun, we lead social inclusive rides. So we have 11 chapters currently. We're working on slowly growing that. But it does take time, as you all know, if you've ever worked on a project like this, we get emails probably once or twice a week saying, how do I start a chapter in my town? And we'll get there. But right now it really is a slow growth kind of thing. Because my worst nightmare is somebody shows up to an all bodies on bikes ride and doesn't feel included or doesn't feel like they're part of the community. And so we're just very intentional and very deliberate of how we grow. So that's kind of the background. That's how All Bodies on Bikes got started. That's where my passion came from. And now I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit to some size inclusion work. Before I do that, I want to pause and ask if there's any questions or comments. Feel free to put them into the chat. So I'll pause for just a couple seconds, give folks a chance, and then keep going.
I'll chime in real quick. This is Anne
Please.
from BCM. I'm curious, we're doing a lot of work around inclusivity, and I think one of the things that's so important is recognizing that it's a constant journey, not just I've checked off a box and now we're inclusive. What are some of the questions that you keep asking of your organization and what you're doing to, stay inclusive?
Yeah. Oh, I love this. I think one of the big questions is who's coming to our rides and who is not coming to our rides. Kaylee and I are keenly aware that, and I'll talk about this in just a slide or two. We have size privilege. We are on the smaller end of the spectrum. We can find bikes that work for us. We can find clothes that work for us. It can be a struggle, but the equipment is out there. We're also aware that we are white women. We are cisgendered women. And so who else can we bring to the table? Who else can we invite? Who else needs to be on the leadership? Are there additional steps we need to take to make sure that we actually are including all bodies? We had an interesting, this was personally really interesting. We always said that we were for all abilities. And then I was leading a ride and a woman showed up on a tricycle. And she used some leg braces. I could tell she had some developmental disabilities. And it was kind of a reality check moment of, okay, is she going to be able to take part in this ride? And how's it going to work? And it ended up being awesome. She's come on like 5 rides since then and really become part of our Northwest Arkansas chapter. But that was definitely a reality check of like, oh, we use these words, but is it actually true? And yeah, it did impact, the pace that we went at. We made sure she's on it was a non-electric assist trike, 1 gear, but she is a very, very strong rider. And so just being aware, short turns or, making sure that if we're going up sidewalks, they're wide enough for a 3-wheeled bike to get up. So yeah, I think it's just constantly taking stock of who's showing up and who's not, and who do we want to show up, and then asking for feedback is the biggest thing we do.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going. Feel free to put comments, questions into the chat, and I'll either address them as we go through this, or at the end, we'll have time for questions. Okay, so as we get into this conversation, I do want to just kind of set some ground rules, acknowledging that this is a conversation a lot of us have never been a part of, or it's been in a doctor's office, or just something uncomfortable. And so I hope these help set a good foundation, similar to the motto that I talked about at the very beginning. But the first one is fat is not a bad word. You might have heard me refer to myself as fat, and I use it just as a neutral descriptor of body types. We'll talk a little bit more about that language in another couple slides, but just off the top, fat is not a bad word. The second one, I would ask that, you kindly refrain from diet talk. I don't anticipate that this will be an issue, but I think it's a good idea in general. Don't talk about your diet, unless you're talking with your nutritionist or, people you're eating food with. There's no need to. The third is please don't body shame yourself or others. It can be a really easy thing to do when you're, sharing a story or, talking about challenges of finding clothing or equipment. And it's okay to talk about your body, but work on not body shaming yourself or other people. The fourth is just to be aware of coded language. And what I mean by this is, what is the true intent of what you're saying? If you say, oh my God, Marley, you're so confident to put yourself on Instagram in a bikini. What I could potentially hear is, if my body looked like yours, I wouldn't be caught dead in a bikini. And that might not be what you're meaning at all. But sometimes things can have hidden layers. And that kind of leads into the next one, number 5, trust intent, but acknowledge impact. As we get into these conversations, they can be emotionally charged. We all have different relationships with our bodies. And so just being aware that, you might have a good intent when you say something, but the impact when it lands on somebody, we don't know where they're at emotionally. And so being aware and acknowledging, like, oh, that, I really didn't mean to hurt your feelings. So just being aware of those sorts of things. And then finally, just a general reminder that we can't determine somebody's health just by looking at them. And frankly, it's none of our business. Health comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and it's none of our business unless somebody brings it up to us. But you'll see as we go through this, I've got some images of some bigger bodies that you might not have seen in, athletic clothing before. And I think can be easy to let our internal biases color our interactions or the way that we think about things. So just a good reminder that we have no idea what is going on inside of somebody else's body. I touched on this briefly, but privilege. So just like, race, gender, sexuality, age, body size is a spectrum. And the farther on either side that you are, comes with different privileges. And so there's this concept, I did not invent this. There's a lot of fat scholars out there who use the fatness spectrum to describe body size, basically. And so I'm like a small fat to a mid fat, depending on the time of year and how much I'm moving my body and what's going on. But what that essentially means is I can largely find clothes. I can find access to services when I go to the doctor's office. Yes, they might tell me I need to lose weight, but largely my concerns are listened to. The farther towards the bigger end of the spectrum that you get, that might not necessarily be true. So just being aware of our privilege, and that all of us have some relative level of privilege when it comes to body size. Lauren, I absolutely love that comment there. Health is not a moral imperative. Nobody owes us their health. Oftentimes when I put something up, a picture up on Instagram with me riding a bike, people will say, good for you not being on the couch. And I like to push back against that narrative, because there's nothing wrong with being on the couch. We all deserve rest. Couches are great. TV is great. And it's really easy to fall into like the good fatty narrative of like, oh, I'm fat, but it's okay because I ride my bike and I'm healthy. Like, no, we don't want to deal with any of that. We don't want to get into that. Nobody owes you health whatsoever. Okay. I talked about this a little bit, but just to give you a landscape of where we're going over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about the market opportunity and why this matters. I often give this presentation to brands or to companies, and making the economic case for size inclusion is often what moves things. And obviously today is a little bit of a different context, but we'll talk about it a little bit. We'll get into some of the challenges that bigger body folks face, and we'll talk about that specific to the bike world. We'll spend a little bit of time on best practices, and then we'll end with some, allyship suggestions, and then where to learn more. So, just a reminder on this, that hiking, biking, backpacking, kind of any of these things where we're working on size inclusion, they're inherently physical activities. And no matter how much we change our attitudes, clothing, equipment, access to all those things, there could still be barriers for folks. And I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of things that we can do to lower those barriers, and to reduce those barriers, whether it's, making sure that folks know e-bikes are welcome on our rides, making sure folks know that tricycles are welcome, having access to different sizes. And we'll talk about those things. But acknowledging there could still be very real barriers to folks. And our goal is to to lower and to reduce those barriers. So again, as we get into this, just want to spend a little bit of time on language. You've heard me talk about fat before. And the thing that I want to say about this is I self-identify as fat, but if I see another person whose body looks like mine, I'm not going to automatically call them fat. Fat has such an emotional charge in our culture. And to just call somebody else fat can be bristling, it can be abrasive. And so I would encourage you, unless somebody gives you explicit permission to use that word, there's some other terms that you can use. And what I recommend is just people in bigger bodies, people in smaller bodies. It's very objective, and there's no denying it. If I'm standing next to a 6'4" person who plays football, my body is smaller than theirs. If there's a child standing next to me, my body is bigger than theirs. And there's no moral value to saying bigger or smaller bodies. So that's just kind of my word of caution as you start to think about and explore this. One story I love to tell is my nephew. He's in 2nd grade now, but when he was in kindergarten, I had a film come out, and he went to school and he was really excited to tell his teacher about this. So my fat aunt had a film come out, and she said, "Oh, Liam, we don't use that word. That's a mean word." And he said, "No, Marley likes that word. That's what she calls herself." And my sister ended up getting a phone call from the teacher saying, "Hey, this thing happened today." And my sister was like, "Oh yeah, that's actually true. That's a word that we use in our family. It's a neutral descriptor." And this teacher was kind of like, "Okay, I wasn't necessarily prepared to have that conversation with my kindergartners," but kind of opened up her eyes to the reality of it. And so, I just share that to talk about the nuance of it, where, maybe using the word fat is appropriate within your close circle of friends or families, but it does take some explaining to the wider world at large. I refrain from using the terms obese and obesity. You heard me mention them earlier. But the reason why I don't like those terms is they're very medicalized. They come from the BMI, which, if you're not aware, is a very, very problematic tool. There's a great podcast episode. I can share it with the Bike Maine team, who can share it out later along with these slides. But essentially, it was designed by I think it was Belgian mathematician or statistician, and it was never designed to be used on an individual basis. It was meant to be used for population level studies. And it has just become very, very problematic. I've been technically morbidly obese since I was like 13, and I'm not dead yet. The other thing that I would offer to you with the terms obese and obesity is the Latin root of the word obese comes from the word obesus, which means to have eaten oneself fat. And we all know body sizes vary for a number of reasons, including what you eat, but it's a really problematic term. And I would encourage you to, do what you can to remove it from your vocabulary. And then the final one is joyful movement. It's really easy for those of us who live in the bike world and love the bike world to get caught up in conversations about exercise or calories or all of these things. And we try and focus on joyful movement at All Bodies on Bikes, encouraging people and empowering people to move their bodies in a way that feels joyful. Our hope is that bicycling is a part of that, but if it's not bikes for you, figuring out another way to move your body joyfully. Any questions about that? Okay, feel free to put them into the chat. I know this is like a fire hose of information to the face, and so it can be a lot to digest. Another concept that I want to talk about before we get into the challenges is the idea of body positivity and body neutrality. If you Google my name, you'll see articles from CNN and MSNBC of this body positive trailblazer is trying to change cycling and wants you to come along. And while those articles are great, I don't consider myself body positive. Body positivity, we've all seen it all over the internet. And it's kind of this idea that I love my legs, I love my cellulite, I love my rolls, I love all of it. And I just think it's unrealistic. No matter how much you love and appreciate your body, it's totally normal to get frustrated with things, or to not love every single part of your body. And so instead, I like to practice what's called body neutrality. And the idea behind that is you can appreciate your body for what it allows you to do. Here's a couple examples here. For body neutrality, my body allows me to move in ways that feel joyful. Thanks to my body, I can experience adventures. I'm frustrated with my knee, but I still appreciate my body. And the core difference is like how I feel about my body has nothing to do with how I feel about myself. My self-worth is not derived from how I feel about my body. Whereas body positivity can really become this kind of cycle of, well, I love myself because I love my body, including all of its cellulite. So just kind of acknowledging those differences and encouraging folks who, maybe are very frustrated with their bodies to still appreciate them for what they allow them to do, and to practice body neutrality. Okay, so body size inclusion, why it matters. Let's get into some of the details there, because it does matter more than just including people and feeling good about it. There's some very real applications and consequences. And so, the average size woman in the US wears between a size 16 and a 20. This stat, I think, was from last year from the International Journal of Fashion Design. And there's no sign that this is changing or that Americans, by and large, are getting smaller. On the men's side, I think the average waist size is 40 inches at this point. And so, we are a country of big people. But what does that mean? So, body size is not considered a protected class in 48 states. That means you can be fired from your job. You can be refused housing. You can be refused healthcare. It is not considered a protected class. New York City actually just made body size a protected class. And so technically, while New York State, it's not protected, there are municipalities where it is. 53% of women have been shamed by their doctors because of their weight. I'm honestly a little surprised this stat isn't higher, but it impacts, people's willingness to get healthcare, if your concerns are not taken seriously. I can think in my own life where I've gone in for an ear infection and been told I need to lose weight. And it's like, come on, buddy, I'm here because my ear hurts. I don't need a lecture on losing weight. And then, there's this last one, 45% of British employers said they were less likely to hire a fat interviewee over a thin one. And, you can see this bias and this negative attitude in popular culture all the time. Fat people are often depicted as lazy or stupid or less capable. So it really does impact the real world experience of people in bigger bodies. Another great thing about being fat, I say that facetiously, is this idea of the fat tax. And, for many things, it simply costs more to be fat. This is a glaring example that I got from a bike brand where they literally use the exact same model, and the exact same picture for the standard size top and the plus size top. And the plus size top costs $10 more. And you might say, well, Marley, that makes sense because there's more fabric on the plus size tops. And yeah, that's true. And this is a decision that businesses get to make. But when I'm doing consulting, I encourage them to, if those extended sizes truly do cost more, more fabric costs, or the factory is trying to pass those costs along to you, can you average the cost among all the sizes? Because people in bigger bodies notice these things. We talk about them. We share experiences, and it's like, okay, I'm not going to shop at that brand because they are charging me more for my size. And once you become aware of it, you'll start to see this all over the place. And it does take work on the part of the folks selling the things. For example, All Bodies on Bikes, we have t-shirts for sale. And we just use a print on demand Shopify seller. And when we set it up, I think it was extra small through extra large for one price. And then 2X was $2 more, 3X was 3, $4 more, etc. And if we didn't go through and reset those prices, our audience would have seen that, which just doesn't feel good. So we just set, a standard price across the board, which does mean that we are making less profit on the smaller sizes. No, less profit on the bigger sizes. But it's important to us that somebody who wears a 4X is paying the same price as somebody who wears a small. So just to kind of recap that, why does size inclusion matter? Well, because it's the right thing to do, but also we are your customers. If you're leaving money on the table, if you're not serving bigger bodies, sizeism has a very real impact on health, money, employment, all sorts of things. And then, again, everyone deserves to participate fully in any activity they choose, regardless of their size. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is just to show, the plus size market is continuing to grow. And so this isn't something that is going away next year or tomorrow. So let's talk about the challenges. And this is more specific back to the bike world. And so the bike world is not designed or made for big or small people. I love this photo. This is my friend Bailey. We were recording a podcast together and we started talking about some of the challenges that we face, her as a small Black woman, me as a large bodied person. And it made me realize that I have challenges finding clothes. So does she on the smaller end of the spectrum. And so just an awareness that the bike world is really good at catering to one body type and we could all do better. So what are the challenges? The first is safety related. There are often very low weight limits on bikes, wheels, components, and oftentimes those weight limits are really hard to find. Another part of it is protective and technical equipment doesn't come in bigger sizes. And I'll show you some examples of that here in a minute. The second one is clothing. I've talked about this a little bit, but there's super limited selection for people in bigger bodies. And the bigger your body gets, the harder it is to find stuff. This is especially problematic for technical or rain gear. And then third is the culture. And this one I think is more of a perception based on what's presented to us in the media. Because my experience traveling around the country and around the globe is cyclists are actually pretty darn inclusive and pretty darn diverse. But what we see presented to us is, this is what a cyclist look like. And if you don't fit that model, you don't belong. And as we all know, that's simply not true. So back to the weight limits. When I give this presentation in person, I like to do a show of hands of who didn't know that there were weight limits? And it's pretty common, especially if it's not something that you have personally been challenged with. I have a lot of hope in this area. A lot of the new direct-to-consumer e-bike brands, so Rad Power Bikes, Avanton, a couple of other ones, they have made weight limits front and center on their websites. When you go and look at a bike brand, or excuse me, a bike model, and that's because they know that people are transporting kids, sports equipment, they're becoming car replacements. And so the weight capacity is a very real consideration when buying a bike. It's some of the more legacy brands, I've got a project with Cannondale right now to make the weight limit easier to find. Because as it is right now, you have to, dig around in the owner's manual and find your exact model. And, oh, do I have the carbon or the alloy? And finding all that. So trying to make that easier. And then making sure that bike shops know that these weight limits exist and some of the techniques to make equipment available. I talked about it at the beginning, but, breaking spokes and wheels is a very, very common challenge for people in bigger bodies, but it's also one of the easiest things to solve. Custom wheels are not that expensive. Getting a wheel with a lot of extra spokes to distribute that weight is a very, I'd say simple solution for people in bigger bodies who want to ride bikes. On our website, on the All Bodies on Bikes website, we do have a list of clothing brands that come in extended sizes. And I would welcome additional suggestions there. More and more brands are getting better at this, which I'm so grateful to see. But it does mean that we're not always aware of them. And so when folks ask us for resources, we have a list, but if you are aware of a brand that's not on there, please let me know. Some other specific pain points in the bike world, rain gear, finding rain pants and a raincoat is really, really hard. I was actually in Bicycling Magazine a couple years ago talking about my favorite rain jacket. And it just feels so silly because it's such a basic piece of equipment, that finding a rain jacket for me became this holy grail. And it's still a challenge. I loved a Pearl Izumi one, but they made up to a 3X. They stopped making it up to a 3X. So it's a continual journey. Protective gear, and here I'm talking about knee pads and elbow pads. Anytime I put up a picture of me mountain biking, I inevitably get somebody commenting, "Where's your knee pads?" And I just want to respond back, "I don't know. Where are they?" Because I've literally never found a pair that fits, which impacts the type of mountain biking that I do. I tend not to get so aggressive or go as hard as I'd like to. Great point, Lauren. The next slide is for you. Outerwear for winter. And then also oftentimes plus size stuff is not at an accessible price point. We talked about the economics of it, but oftentimes people in bigger bodies are looking for entry level equipment, and it's really hard to find in those extended sizes. This is the bicycling thing. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but it was so silly. There was a full page in there of me talking about a rain jacket. And again, it should be a non-issue. You should be able to walk into an REI or a bike shop and get the gear that you need, regardless of what size you are. So to your point, Lauren, sizing in the bike world is really problematic. Before you get upset, these are my friends and my sister. They've given me permission to use these photos. And so, I've talked about me. I wear a size 18 to 20, typically a size large in t-shirts. But in the bike world, I wear a 3X to a 6X. My sister wears a size 12. She wears anywhere from a large to a 3X. And she's actually told me, "Marley, I would never buy a 3X." And I think that's a pretty common experience for folks. I try and preach that it doesn't matter what the label says, but we still get in our heads about it. And so if you're used to buying a large or a medium and suddenly you're in a 3, 4, 5X, it just doesn't feel very good. And then my friend Brandy here, who there's nothing big about her except for her personality. She even finds herself unable to find things that fit her, and she is a small-bodied human. Okay, so we're going to switch gears. This is kind of the last section, best practices and case studies. And I've tried to aim these at folks who are, organizing bike events or rides, things like that. So the first one is to include diverse bodies in your images. My example here is not bike related, but stick with me. And so this is one of my favorite brands. They make activewear for bigger bodies. They started out making extra small through 7XL, and then the extended sizes were selling so well that they stopped making smaller sizes. And now they only make large through 7XL. And honestly, I have never seen bodies that look like this portrayed like this in activewear, looking happy, looking joyful, and actually showing what the clothing looks like on bodies, on real bodies. Couple other awesome things that they do. This Black woman here at the bottom, they use her to show how to measure your body. If you're in a non-traditional body and maybe you don't have that hourglass waist, you might not know, where do I find my waist measurement? Where do I find my hip measurement? And so they provide a great example of that. One other thing that they do that I love is they have a downloadable measuring tape, which most measuring tapes actually have one right here, because I'm sending brands my measurements all the time. Is most measuring tapes only go up to 60 inches. And if you look at the size chart, even a 3X, a traditional 3X might be above 60 inches. So if you're above that size, how do you know what size to order? And so they have a downloadable measuring tape that goes to 120 inches. So it's a piece of paper, you cut it out, you tape it together, and then you can accurately get your size. Something so simple, but so revolutionary, that I literally had never even thought about doing it. Just a couple other examples from the bike outdoor world is your images need to reflect your target audience. This one at the top is from Athleta. And I look at those women, I'm like, oh yeah, I could see myself among them. And then this image down here, I don't know what the point of that image was. Like, what are they trying, what story are they trying to tell me with those images? But I know that I don't see myself reflected and I'm not super jazzed up about shopping from that brand. Here's a couple really great examples. The Bike Maine folks might recognize the lower picture, but showing diverse bodies in your images. This one from the 5 Borough Bike Tour, they've got bigger bodies, they've got people of color, they've got happy people, not the fanciest bikes either. I think it can be really easy to get caught up in, let's do a photo shoot and let's make sure that everything looks perfect. But that's not the reality of who is coming to our events and who we want to attract to our events. And so I just love that image down at the bottom. You got the woman who's got the gloves, she's got the matching kit. And then you got the 2 folks in the middle who look like normal everyday people. And so just kudos to y'all for showing real bodies. So best practice number 2, pretty quick here, merch and swag. Size matters. So, if you're having an event and you're gonna have jerseys for sale, working with vendors that make extended sizes and ensuring that those sizes are available to order. I've been to way too many events where they work with a brand that I know makes up to a 5 or 6X, but when you go, when you're signing up on the reg page, the only option available is up to 2X. And so I will often reach out to the event organizer and say, hey, I see you're working with Primal or Champion System or whoever, is it possible to get those extra sizes? And it's usually not done out of malice. It's just, they didn't even think about it. And it's a real quick fix to make. Ensuring that a size chart is available to people and accurate. Lots of brands, as they're starting to make these extended sizes, don't always update their size chart. And so it's a good opportunity to take a look at that and make sure the size chart reflects reality. And then finally, when possible, offering non-size swag items. So bandanas, hats, water bottles. I mean, ideally no swag because a lot of it ends up in the landfill anyway, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. But so whenever possible, including things that people of any size or shape could use. And then the last one is just communication is crucial. And so as you are putting together descriptions of rides or events, what is the pace and the distance? What do I need to bring? Are there any stops along the way? Who is the ride intended for? If it's a women's ride, are non-binary, are trans folks, are gender non-conforming folks welcome? Just being really, really intentional about your communication and your language. If it's a race or an event, communicating how late are aid stations going to be open, and translating that to, we're making an effort to keep our aid stations as open as late as possible. Please maintain 10 miles an hour to ensure that you hit that cutoff. If there is a time cutoff, making sure that folks are aware of that and what happens if they are out there beyond that time cutoff. Will their number be pulled? Will they be forced to get into a sag wagon? Just being very clear about what the slower folks need to know and what to expect. And then, whenever possible, please keep the finish line open and have food and beverages for those folks. Like, how many people are still on the course. And if you can, maybe your food vendor needs to leave, but can you, grab some food for them to go? So that way, when you come across that finish line after 10 hours, 11 hours of riding, there is something for you and you don't feel like you've just been left behind. And then finally, as we finish up, 5, I call it easy ways to make your ride more inclusive. And I've talked about these a little bit, but, be honest about what pace you're going to go at and stick to it. Fast rides are fine as long as folks know that that's what they're getting themselves into. I also really encourage you to publish your route for the ride. Are there big hills people are going to go up and maybe be anxious about? What can you do to lower that anxiety? This next one, having a sweeper, so somebody who's designated to stay at the back of the pack, who knows the route and the destination. Whenever I'm leading a ride, I like to introduce these folks at the beginning and say, hey, Travis, can you wave your hand and wave to people he's going to be at the back of the group. It is his entire job to stay at the very back to make sure nobody gets left behind. And folks, just can generally breathe a sigh of relief to know that they're not going to be left behind. Always encourage you to regroup at the top of the hills and actually give the people in the back a chance to rest. And we can all play a part in that. So maybe you're just attending the ride and you see that, okay, the back of the pack got here and the leader is ready to go. Can you speak up and say, hey, can we wait another 30 seconds or another minute to give folks a chance to breathe, or make it up an excuse? Oh, I'm not quite ready yet. Which might not be true, but it gives the people in the back a chance to rest and breathe without having that pressure on them. And then finally, encouraging more accurate descriptions of what the ride is actually going to be like. Oftentimes when a ride is slow, it gets lumped in as beginner, which, to be clear, there's nothing wrong with beginner, but just be more descriptive of what skills are needed. What pace are you going at? Do you need to know how to hold a pace line? That might not be a beginner friendly ride, but that's okay. So just being aware of that. And the other, kind of the other side of this is oftentimes there's folks who are new to cycling who are very fast, but have no group ride skills at all, or no bike handling skills. And so, being aware that, cool, this ride is an 18 to 20 mile an hour. You need to know how to hold a pace line. You need to know how to do X, Y, Z. Just making sure that those things are appropriate for everybody. Okay, I lied. I have like 2 more slides and then we'll get into questions. So just some real world applications of this. Thinking about considerations for bigger bodied folks, thinking about events. If you're setting up a booth or setting up a dinner or a gala, can everybody move freely in the space? Or are you squeezing in between chairs or in between racks? I like to think about it, if there was a parent pushing a stroller or somebody using a wheelchair, could they easily access and move around the space? And that works well for bigger bodies too. Think about your chairs. Who can sit comfortably? Whenever I go to, a friend's patio and I see flimsy camping chairs, I always get anxiety of, oh God, am I going to break that? And so, having chairs that are strong, maybe some couches, maybe some benches that don't have arms, so people of all sizes can sit comfortably. Thinking about how the space is accessed. Are there chairs? Stairs? Are there ramps, etc.? And then I already touched on the swag aspect of things. And so lastly, 4 tips to be a good ally. And I apologize, I am going through this so quickly. This could be a whole hour in and of itself, but I'll make sure that this presentation gets shared. So I think the biggest thing is to use your privilege. Take on the emotional labor for your friends in bigger bodies. And a good example of this is maybe you're going on vacation and you guys want to go kayaking. I guarantee you your friend in a bigger body is already thinking, do they have a life jacket that fits me? Is there a weight limit? Is my butt gonna fit? And so you, as a smaller bodied person who these might not even be a concern for you, you can call the place and say, hey, you guys have any weight limits? Do you offer, bigger size life jackets? And that way, when it's being planned, you can either say, hey guys, I don't think kayaking is a great idea. Let's think of something else. Or, hey, I called ahead. Here's what it is. Will that work for you? You can always ask your friends about their riding preferences. I love to ride alone. I don't mind catching up at the top of hills as long as people wait for me, but not everybody's like that. Some people like for you to go at their pace. And so just asking, hey, do you want me to wait for you? What's our plan? How do you want to do this? The third one is support brands that actually make inclusive sizing. And the way I like to think about this is, if you wear a size large, take a look. Do they have a size or 2 bigger than you, than what you're currently wearing? And if they don't, maybe try shopping at a different brand. And it's a pain. It's not easy, but it really does give you a glimpse into what life is like for people in bigger bodies trying to find clothing that works. And then finally, I already talked about this, but watch your compliments. They might actually be an insult, and just to be aware of that. Okay, so I'm going to finish here. Take a screenshot of this if you want to. Lots of great resources, podcasts, other creators, etc., books, and my email address. So I didn't leave a ton of time for questions, but I'm going to stop talking and let you all ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Marley. That's awesome. I'm almost a little emotional after that one. It was great. Uh, Thanks for the work you're doing. It's incredible. It's very much an inspiration to all of us, and just how you be able to approach inclusivity in this way, and be able to just really be such an advocate for getting more people on bikes. I love it.
Thank
So,
you. I just noticed your Manatee Cycling Club shirt.
yeah, I was gonna do it before.
So quick funny story on that is, folks, please do feel free to put your questions into the chat. And there's no dumb questions. So the shirt that he's wearing is the Manatee Cycling Club, which is a shirt that I designed. It's not a real cycling club, although it could be. But essentially, I was bullied on the internet. Somebody said I had the fitness of a manatee, and it was really hurtful. And then I realized, you know what? Manatees are actually really cool. And so we made these shirts as a fundraiser, and it was great. So, oh, Allison, I love it. Your All Butts on Bike shirt. Thank you for supporting it. So.
Marley, I have a question. So we don't have a chapter in Maine, and one of the questions I had was, what do folks, what is that process like starting a chapter, what here in Maine, or wherever folks are across the country?
Yeah. So it starts with just sending us an email, or sending me an email. As we are building out the chapters, we are not formalizing, but kind of standardizing our processes. One of the not so lovely things about becoming officially a nonprofit is like insurance and waivers and all of those things. And so email me if you're interested. And we, on our strategic plan, I think we're opening 5 new chapters this year and then 10 next year. And it's essentially, it's a training process, making sure that you feel comfortable and confident to lead an actually inclusive group ride, making sure that you have the resources. And it's almost like an indoctrination of, this is what All Bodies on Bikes is about. Are you down for it? If that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, a couple questions here from Eric. How important do you think it is that ride leaders represent, body looks wise, the folks they want to invite and lead? I think your actions matter more than what your body size looks like. I think about, we've got a couple chapter leaders who live in smaller sized bodies, but they have really made it clear that they're committed to this work. And I would say, if you do look like a typical, if you're 5'10" and 150 pounds, maybe bringing some other folks along with you as leaders, because it just frankly can be intimidating. And I know none of us get to choose our bodies, but that's kind of the reality of it. So, suggest companies that sell wide width bike shoes. No. And maybe that's a crowdsourcing question. I know Shimano makes a couple, but this is something I struggle with as well. I've heard Lake is pretty good, Lake. If people have other suggestions, please feel free to put them into the chat, because I honestly don't know. Ooh, Northwave. Okay, somewhat wide.
Yeah. Some of the Adidas shoes are a bit wider than others too. But yeah.
Yeah. I had somebody ask me the other day, why do you wear cycling shoes? And so I wear flats. I used to clip in, I don't anymore. And honestly, it's just like the hard sole. So if you can find a shoe that has like a stiff sole, that will also work really well for biking. So yep, Shimano and Lake. Sounds like it. Yeah. And Andy, thanks for your comment about e-bikes. E-bikes are a game changer. I am fully convinced that they are a climate solution. And, I think any hand wringing over, are they a real bike, or like, are they cheating? Who cares? Like, it doesn't impact anybody else. And if you're riding for fitness, or if you're racing, an e-bike, there might need to be separate categories, but they offer so many more people access to this activity that we love, that I think it's silly that we get so caught up in them. So, suggestions for incorporating into schools. Yeah. And I'm assuming you're talking about size inclusion in schools. I think it's a cultural shift that needs to happen about, PE classes talking about joyful movement, decentering weight from the conversation, making sure that our kids are eating food that makes them feel good. And I think a lot of it's a language shift of, you don't earn your food, you didn't play hard at recess and now you get a treat. Food is fuel, food is power, and just, making sure that kids have activities that they love and enjoy, and clothing. When I was a kid, I had to buy from the Husky section, which never feels good. So I think it's a broader cultural shift that needs to happen. But that would be my encouragement for schools is, starting with the teachers, maybe the PE classes, and making sure kids don't feel stigmatized because of their body size. Just making sure. Any other questions here? So please do, if you have further questions, email me, marley@allbodiesonbikes.com. And I'll make sure that you all have access to this presentation as well.
All right, Marley, one last question. I read in an interview that you were hoping to go for a bike ride with Kelly Clarkson and Oprah, and I just wanted to know if that happened.
It did not. Well, not yet. I still want it to. But it's interesting, and I don't know if I want to get into this too much because people get to do whatever they want to with their bodies. But both of them have recently lost a significant amount of weight. And it's been a little disheartening to see. Because again, people get to do whatever they want to with their bodies, but I really looked up to them because they were living unapologetically in bigger bodies. And so I would still love to go for a bike ride with them and, have them see the power of their bodies on bikes.
Well, you did get to ride with Reggie Miller, so that's kind of cool too.
That is true. That is very true. Yeah. So.
And so, yes, so this has been recorded and it will be on our website in a couple days. So if you've registered for this event, we will email you the recording and it will also live on our website.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. And Sarah, amazing point. And I can't believe I didn't talk about it, but fat phobia is rooted in racism. It's, fear of Black body and the curvy body. And so, yeah, the belly of the beast, it's always been ours. It sounds like you've got some amazing resources that I need to read these books as well. So wonderful. Yeah.
Well, Marley, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. You also made this webinar very easy on our part. So thank you so much. But
you are so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We would love, if there's any other questions, please reach out to Marley. We'll have this on our website very soon. And until then, everyone go ride bikes.
Yes, be well and be safe.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Marley.
Thank you.
Thank you.